Syncopated rhythms, electronic dreams. AI music is here.
Yeah, so I'm David CRANDALL. I'm a professor of computer science in the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering. And I'm the director of the Luddy Artificial Intelligence Center. I'm a super amateur pianist, and I'm super excited personally today because I think this is the closest that I'll ever get to being invited to perform on the stage at IU Jacobs. So I'm going to very quickly sort of say maybe 2 sentences of introduction about this wonderful panel so that you hear all of their honorifics and understand how wonderful they are. And then we're going to go do sort of a round of short presentations, maybe a few minutes from each person to reflect on our topic today of creativity. And so I'll start with Maya ACKERMAN, who's joining us online from Palo Alto. She's the CEO and co-founder of WaveAI, which is a startup revolutionizing music creation. She's also an associate professor of computer science and engineering at Santa Clara University, and she has a PhD from the University of Waterloo, and is also a singer, pianist, and songwriter. So thanks so much for being here today. And then JOANNA WORONKOWICZ is a cultural economist at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at IU Bloomington, where she's co-founder and director of the Center for Cultural Affairs and co-director of the Arts, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation Lab. She received the PhD from the University of Chicago and served as a senior research officer at the National Endowment for the Arts before joining IU. Thank you. JOANNA. And then Shannon HAYDEN has toured the world for over a decade with her unique setup, which is a 19th century cello enhanced by modern amplification and electronic modifications. Her sound, which is deeply rooted in classical music, has been equally shaped by lifelong passion for experimental soundscapes. She's trained by legends like Starker here at IU and Parasot at Yale, and her music fuses analog warmth with digital edge, offering audiences a transformative experience. Thank you so much for being here. And many of you heard her work last night. And then Caleb WEINTRAUB is Associate Professor, Area Head of Painting, and Director of Undergraduate Studies at the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design at IU. His artwork combines technological and traditional processes, using painting as a means of exploring memory, imagination, and the encoding of experience. His work has been exhibited at venues nationwide in New York, Chicago, LA, and others, and has been featured in numerous publications. Thanks so much, Caleb. And then finally, also joining us online, this time from Baltimore, Roger DANNENBERG is Emeritus Professor of Computer Science, Art, and Music. He received the PhD in Computer Science from Carnegie Mellon. Among his other accomplishments, he's the co-creator of Audacity, which is the audio editor that has been downloaded hundreds of millions of times. His patents for computer accompaniment were the basis for the smart music system used by hundreds of thousands of music students. He's also a trumpet player and composer who has performed around the world. Thanks so much for joining us. And so with that, I think I'll turn things over to the panelists going one by one. And so maybe Maya, would it be okay to start with you?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So good to be here. I have a very quick presentation for you here, which I'm going to time, make sure that I don't go over. I'm going to go over 5 core concepts around creative AI. So first of all, before we get into the 5 concepts, creative AI is very, very old, much older than generative AI, which is only a couple of years old in the public mind. We've had incredible creative AI systems for well over 40 years. Systems like Amy by David Cope out of UC Santa Cruz, which made music in the style of Bach, Vivaldi, and even expert musicians could not distinguish the work from that of the original composers, and people like Harold Cohen, who made a system called Aaron, also back in the 80s, which created art that was displayed in galleries. But it wasn't very well known. It wasn't in the public consciousness, but we did have these ideas, and we've been developing them in the research world and a little bit beyond for several decades. All right, so the first concept in creative AI that I wanted to share has to do with convergence versus divergence. We've had so much, we've been heavily influenced by OpenAI and ChatGPT in our understanding of generative AI. But what makes those newer systems actually somewhat unusual is that they're convergent. A chatbot is supposed to tell you the truth, at least sometimes on simple questions like, who is the president of the United States and when was it founded, and which is the coldest country on earth. We expect a chatbot to have some sense of truth and falsehood. That's what we call convergence here. But really, generative AI, and especially creative AI, functions much better in a divergent space like poetry and music and art, where it's really about exploring creative possibilities and not so much about getting things right or wrong. Another really important concept in creative AI has to do with autonomous versus co-creative systems. So very often when a community, or in this case, most of humanity, discover creative AI, a lot of focus is originally put on autonomous systems. So things like ChatGPT, like Midjourney started off, where it's all about the creativity of the machine, and the machine does things more or less from start to finish. But the other possibility is co-creativity, and that's working together with the machine. And that has a lot of depth. This is a pretty rich space of possibilities. In fact, we can look at the collaborative spectrum. We can go all the way from the machine doing almost everything and the human only slightly contributing, all the way to the human doing almost everything and the machine only slightly contributing, to anything in the middle, to very even-handed collaborations, which can also look very different. You could be contributing different skills, you can be doing things very evenly on every skill, and there's sort of many other possibilities here and everything in between. So when we think about a machine collaborating with a person on a creative task, it's as wide a space as two humans collaborating with each other on a creative task. Another really important concept, and really where machines have a big advantage over us humans, is in their ability to explore the creative space of possibilities. So for example, my system Lyric Studio can come up with millions and millions of valid ideas for the next line of lyrics. Whereas that's something that tends to be difficult for humans to kind of like really see a wide space of possibilities. This is not to say that machines are more creative than us or have better skills than us. There is a lot of ways in which we have massive advantages in creativity over machines. I just wanted to highlight this sort of interesting way in which they really can bring value to our creative process, help us see more possibilities than we are perhaps able to see by ourselves. And finally, when we're designing co-creative systems, when we want to use machines to genuinely elevate our creativity, I believe it's really important that the human remain in full control of the creative process. And that really has to do with the way that the machine is designed. So creative control is really key. That's something we don't see enough right now with commercial products. They really lean too heavily into being autonomous right here. But this is something that can be done. This is something I've done with my own systems, Lyric Studio and Melody Studio. This is something that Adobe is leaning into with Adobe Firefly and their new music system as well. So there's a whole world of possibilities yet to be created in using AI to genuinely elevate human creativity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great. Maybe Joanna, would you like to go next?
Sure.
And you have some slides, right?
I have some slides, yeah. And if you see me going like this, it's because I don't have a clicker. So there's going to be a lot of this. So nice to see everybody. Thank you for having me on the panel. I'm excited. As I mentioned, as David mentioned, I'm the director for the Center for Cultural Affairs here in the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of AI on music with regard to the panel, Emerging Creativity, but specifically on the effects on audiences and society. So this is the big lens that I try to look through, is what is this ultimately doing to our overall culture? So we're going to start with impact on audiences. So obviously we can think about a lot of these pros and cons that audiences are now able to experience with generative AI technologies. So there's been a lot of talk about the idea of democratizing music creation, providing these personalized experiences through algorithmic recommendations. But there's also, of course, the other side of the coin, which is questioning the emotional depth that AI-generated music and art in general is producing. But this democratization, I think, this democratization idea is really taking hold, this idea that anybody can now make music, anybody can now create art, and it's going to be high quality. But I do think, and maybe I'm one of the purists here, we sort of need to keep on thinking about what these greater psychological and emotional impacts are. So societally, we have to, I tend to start to think about what are these ethical considerations, what are the economic implications. I'm an economist. And then of course, like what is the role of generative AI in cultural expression and preservation? I feel like this is really boring. So you know what? Can you? Yeah, can you click forward? Yeah. No. Okay. So I'm an academic. I've given a lot of these talks. I'm sure we've probably seen a lot of these talks given by our students, and you might have thought that I really knew what I was talking about. But really what I did was I took a prompt, I put it into ChatGPT-4, and I said, create a 5-minute presentation about the effect of AI on creativity. It gave me a lot of information. Then I went ahead and I plugged it into AI for Prezi, which is now a new tool that Prezi, the presentation software, offers. And Prezi created a presentation for me that seemed pretty good. I mean, there was like a lot of content in it that, go ahead, yeah, there's a ton of content in it, a little bit more there. And it was just sort of overwhelming, but I really probably could have brought this here and you wouldn't have known otherwise. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I am going to talk about some of the questions that I'm interested in from my vantage point as an economist. What really interests me about AI and creativity, I'm really interested in, again, the effects of these AI generative technologies and large language models on audiences, consumers, users, patrons, and then how they're going to alter the experiences, demand, communities, markets, and culture itself. So this is my large scale research question that we're just starting to figure out. And if you look into the academic literature, there's really not a lot about this. There's a lot of popular press articles that I'm sure you've started to read. And a couple of those, one, for example, was the 2017 article by Kyle Chaka, who wrote about monoculture, the phrase monoculture in Vox. And he talks about, and this is, you know, things I'm thinking about as well, he talks about whether or not we are actually losing the ability to connect over creative products as reference points that everyone knows with the introduction of AI technologies. So, and actually algorithmic technologies overall. So he points to this idea that the last time that society really connected over a creative product at the same time in the same place was the season finale of the Seinfeld series, right? Like that's the last time that you were like, are you gonna watch it? It's 8 p.m. And otherwise we all watch things in a different time and in a different place.
There's a conference in Bloomington on music and artificial intelligence.
That's where we are, that's where we are. So he calls this fragmentation. And the other question I'm really interested in answering is another one, which he calls monoculture, which is because AI and algorithmic technology is providing us all with these really personalized recommendations, so you can think of your Netflix queue, are we all just going to end up looking the same, right? So we probably log on, and a lot of us probably have the same queues up on Netflix and Amazon Prime, and are we all just going to lose our heterogeneity in terms of what we want to and what we enjoy and what we end up experience in creative products? And then finally, there's this larger question, obviously, and I'm sure it's come up on a lot of panels, which is about the authentic experience, right? So this one really gets to me because I study institutions, and if you think about, there's a lot of evidence now talking about how academics are using AI in writing referee reports for peer review articles, and it's really starting to question and bring up concerns about the public institution of scientific peer review, which we understand to be really important to advancing society. And I think that can be analogous to the public institution of the nonprofit arts and cultural organization right? We have a particular set of experts that we employ in order to have the mission of advancing society. And when we start to introduce technology into those processes, we start to possibly lose the authenticity, but also start to lose trust in our public institutions. So I'm going to just leave you with this really cool quote from a neuroscientist and novelist who had an op-ed in the New York Times yesterday, which I don't know if that was planned, but Eric Hull, and he wrote, it was an op-ed about AI-generated garbage is polluting our culture, and he wrote, isn't it possible that human culture contains within it cognitive micronutrients, which I love that term, that developing brains need? And I'll just leave you with that, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And so, Shannon, do you want to go next?
Well, I think we just demonstrated the power of AI there greatly. As Joanna was speaking, I was like, yes, how does she read my mind? Those are exactly the things I was so concerned about, and these are the questions I want answered. And then I found out it was AI sort of answering the questions I have about AI. So it's a wild world out there, and I think there's no better time for discernment and looking inward and really, using your intuition and knowing what feels right and what's being generated. You just never know. But that was a wonderful presentation, and I appreciate that. Thank you for speaking to all that. I was thinking of various things that I could present today, and I thought, I wanted to gear my spiel to the students that are in the audience. I was thinking today as I was learning about all these tools in the 10 a.m. panel, especially, all these things that are making music creation so much easier for everybody and their grandmother. And where does that leave someone who's currently paying for a very expensive music education? You can just go get a free program or a $10 program, and why are we studying audio engineering? But so I was like, well, I'd like to gear this towards those students, and also feel free to please ask me questions regarding your concerns for this, because I'd like to share a little bit about my story and see if you identify with it, if it also helps you think more about what you would like to incorporate from technology in your future careers. So a bit about my story. I started playing cello because when I was 3, I saw Björk on TV with the Icelandic String Octet, and that was the first time I saw a cello. And I was like, that's what I want to play. That's what I resonated with. And I want to stress that, I wanted to play cello not because I wanted to play Bach every day for the rest of my life. Love Bach, but I wanted to play music, and I wanted to write music. And then at 7, I started classical training in cello, and I ended up from the ages of 12 to 17, I was studying with a professor here, Jana Starker, and very, very, very strict classical training, an amazing toolkit. I love every bit of my classical training from that aspect. It's giving me all the tools to go out there and express whatever I want to express. But meanwhile, it was very, very, just notes on the page type of education. And during that time, when I was 12, I was playing in professional orchestras, and I was spending all of my paychecks on guitar, because I started picking up guitar as well. And I was just, buying all the gear, and I was just fascinated by that world. I saw a lot of people doing a whole lot of things with that instrument, whereas I didn't see that with the classical cello world as much. And those two worlds just went parallel next to each other. With guitar, I was learning to produce music, to record, to write, to improv, to form bands, to book gigs, to manage a band, to all these things. Whereas with cello, I was just learning to be a master of my instrument, And then when I was 15, I ended up combining those skills. And I found the cello. I was like, why don't I play through all these pedals? I'm playing the guitar through. And why don't I write my own music with cello? And I found it to be an even more versatile instrument than guitar. It was my first instrument, so I'm biased. And then from there, I went to I was writing my own music, producing my own albums, and then I went to a very, very classical institution, Yale School of Music, because I wanted to study with that professor there, and it was very strict, and I'm thankful it was just a 3-year program. And after that, I was like, I'm done with academia, I'm going out, I'm going to do my own thing. I've been gearing up for this for some time, and as a result of all the diversification of my skill sets, I've been able to make a living in music, you know, through these various aspects, from producing to engineering to writing my own music, putting 5 solo records out, producing music for other people, touring the world with a very unique sound. You know, I feel like it's still very important to be unique, you know, and I think with AI, that's a whole other thing we might get to a little bit later, but it's like, I think it really does pay to be extremely skilled in these traditional arts, and then move with that foundation, move that forward into this wild world of AI, because you will have an edge, I feel like, and you're not wasting your time at music school because you're going to bring so much more into this situation. And I do also feel that, you know, with all the creators that we're going to have very soon, and I think Chris McMurtry said earlier today, he's like, there's going to be like 1 billion creators by 2030, I think. I think it's going to be very important for us to focus on who makes the cut. Is there going to be room for professional musicians at that point? And the sooner we start talking about this kind of stuff now as artists, the sooner we start collaborating with these people who are making these tools, the sooner we start talking to people like Joanna here and feeling like, you know, who can tie all this together. And, you know, I feel like the better. So whether or not you're a fan of this or not, better get involved in the conversation now so you can be part of its future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then Caleb, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Welcome to AlgoRhythms, where the melodies are flowing. In this futuristic lounge where the music is mind-blowing. Bloomington, Indiana, the hub for AI and sound, where humans and machines gather, harmony unbound, and beat machines a group.
Okay, I think that's probably enough. Thank you. Thanks. I worked very hard on that. I told Suno AI about this summit and said, write a song about it. And that's it. So this is one of those plug and play where it's just prompt. That's it, purely prompt. And it's a 2-minute song. If anybody wants to check it out later, you can check it out. But you know, we've been talking a lot this weekend about using tools that enable artists to interact and negotiate with the tools and create new work. So I'm more in favor of that type of interaction than the, you know, type of prompt and let it go. But just as a sense of seeing what is out there already right now. I think a lot of us are familiar with ChatGPT, the like large language models, and image generators. I think music and video, you know, it's there also, and 3D is around the corner. Okay, so I'm not really going to talk about all these artists that are on the screen right now. I just wanted to mention that there's I think because a lot of us are used to seeing images that have been generated through image generators and maybe various kinds of CNN models or GANs or different kinds of machine learning used in the arts, a lot of it is something, it ends up as image. And that there's certainly value in that, and there's a lot of art that's made that way, but there are also a lot of artists using machine learning and various AI tools to make immersive experiences. And some of the work that I have up here, you know, I don't think some of these people would identify as artists. There's a neuroscientist on here. There are sometimes game designers, game companies, but I experience these as art. They a lot of times don't have necessarily entirely functional purpose yet, or they may be utilitarian in the future, but a lot of times it's about experience and about interaction. So I would recommend maybe taking screenshots or referring to these later if you want to look up some of these artists. But yeah, there's a wide range. I mean, I could point out some. Even in the bottom right is the Adobe Primrose project, which is clothing that can sort of change at the touch of a button. This might be where things are going. On the upper right, there's an image of a well-known scandal where somebody submitted artwork to a contest and won first place, and that, you know, led to a bunch of copyright discussions. Okay, we can keep moving forward. A lot of the projects also have a degree of social commentary, political commentary, understanding how we can use these technologies to interrogate our own aesthetics and our value system. And then some of them are sort of playful, that the work on the upper left is a road trip in which the artist put a video camera on the back of a car, and it wrote about what it was seeing as he traveled the country. Okay, I think we can keep going. Yeah, so I don't expect people to read this. It's a lot of text, but one of the ways, so I've used a lot of these kinds of tools over the course of many years, but I've primarily been using it lately as a brainstorming tool. And so this is just an example where I was talking about some installation painting projects that I was doing, and talking about the title that I wanted to give it. So I said I wanted to name it Fire and, what did I say? Fire and Jetsam and what, Flotsam and whatever it was, like, you know, like I was just mixing up the terms. And anyway, so I had a conversation. I wanted to figure out, did I actually know what those words meant? Is it clear that it's tongue in cheek? And so we're having just a conversation, and this is actually verbal. Like I have my AI set to an audio setting so that I can paint and work, and then also have a conversation as if it were a studio visitor. So these are some images from a pretty early, like a rudimentary image generator. And I still often prefer to use these kinds of things. Right now, you can make images that look fully, highly, realized, totally photographic. But as a painter, I like to have room to invent. Similar to what we were talking about with some of the music tools that have been discussed. And so if I'm making an analogy, I might think, oh, I like the visual grammar of some of these blobby type forms. I like how blurry they are, and here's another example, just more blurry forms, and then you can move forward. And then the work that I do is I will then kind of excavate from that type of composition. And part of that reminds me of this kind of MIDI idea that you take the MIDI and then you can kind of kick that out as any instrument. And for me, I take this kind of input as a prompt, something to riff off of, and then I might make it into a fiber work, or I might use collage or paint or acrylic, and I sort of use it as a bit of a jumping point. Okay, so this is a piece or an experience that happened in like 2020, and it was kind of a turning point for me. So before the pandemic, I'd been working on a lot of labor-intensive, mediated projects, and because I was away from, I wasn't able to get to my studio with my computer, I started working on just gouache and ink studies on the floor of my home, and just started to pull out images from the blobs of information, like hallucinating imagery into that. And it felt familiar. That's how, first as a kid, when I was a kid doodling, that's what I liked to do. And I remembered, oh yeah, I really like that practice. But because I didn't really know what it was about, because I was mostly improvising, I didn't have like a thesis, I didn't have an idea, and I'm constantly telling students that they have to have an idea, you have to communicate the idea, you have to be clear about it, it's got to be, has to be productive. And so I said, well, I don't really know what this is, but maybe I can talk to these language models that are being developed. And so around then in 2020, you could really, there were some slightly more there are some models or some versions where you could really shift the temperature and it could be highly creative. Anyway, so I would talk to them all the time about the work that I was doing, and there's just one moment where it said, I've had this on the screen now, so some people may have already seen it, but the language model in interpreting the work said, the artist chose to make this image fractured or difficult to read to give the viewer a sense of what the character in the painting is experiencing as they make their way through the storm and are disoriented. And just thought that was a quite uncanny observation. And now we're just going to kind of push through some other images. Yeah, so this is the kind of work I do based on these kinds of, that's the scale. Keep going. Yeah, and then the work, okay, I guess I'll stop there for a second. I don't know why on that one, but just to kind of show some of the surfaces. So you can see that I am prompted by the images and by the ideas that and the iterations, some of which are based on these generative models. But I also use I train these models with my own work so that it builds a vocabulary based on some of the stylistic preferences that I have. And so that's been able to allow me to riff on my own, or like kind of see versions of what I might do and then get ideas about that. And sometimes the ideas do imply some kind of physical material result, and then I will try to incorporate those ideas into a version of that. Okay, I'll keep going. And then I taught a class, co-taught a class last year called AI in the Studio, in which we worked with students to develop projects that used AI in some way in their processes. And as one of the final projects, we ask them that they work in their medium of choice, their medium that they prefer, but then they also do some project that's not that's outside their wheelhouse. So some people did sound art, some people did video, if that wasn't their particular discipline. And then I decided, well, if I'm going to make them do it, I'm going to do it also. And so I made an entire aspirational clothing line. It's not functional. I don't think you could sit in any one of these things, but it's a fully functional website. And it's really, it was more like the power of being able to spend 4 days or a week or maybe a little bit more with very little sleep just because it was fun, and just be able to conceive of something that I might not otherwise be able to do and push it all the way to the end, to the point that I'm now collaborating with a colleague on physically making one of these pieces. So yeah, if anybody needs a handbag, a leather handbag inspired by a deep sea angler, it's coming. Okay, next. And then also just the ability to do adjacent work, so and continually train the model so I can use my own photographs, which is not my central practice, but and then train these models with that and riff on it until I can conceive of a body of work. And I think earlier in one of the conversations, there was some attention to the idea that maybe in the future there'll be more of a premium put on the idea of curating or producing or editing. And so one might still be a practitioner and a maker in the discipline, but you can also be a visionary and conceptualize projects that maybe we wouldn't have been able to do in the past. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. And so now I think we go to Roger, who's in either Baltimore or maybe outer space. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thanks. I'm actually in Pittsburgh. Sorry, let me. I'm trying to share the screen here. Yeah, here we go. And okay. Okay, I think you see that. So I'd like to make a distinction between two kinds of creativity in music. And the first of these is composing within a set of conventions established by genre or style or musical language. So you can think of current popular music as one of those, or for example, many composers of the Baroque working in a very similar language. The second kind of creativity is creating a new approach, or what we often say in music is a new language. And so you can think of late Beethoven or the revolutionary music of Stravinsky or Louis Armstrong or Charlie Parker. And maybe this is a continuum, but I think it's an interesting distinction, especially in talking about AI and music. And so I'd like to go back, starting in the earliest years of computer music and AI, which is Hiller and Isaacson's work in, let's see, in 1957, they created this work called Iliac Suite. And let me play just a few seconds. So this is based on rules of counterpoint and understanding of music theory, and the same ideas were applied later and by Charles Ames, who is a student of Hiller's, and this is one example that came out of there, and I think it's just notable that this was actually the work in 1985. Okay, so we'll skip the bridge and jump forward to today. I think one of the most impressive systems out there is Suno. It appears to use techniques for composition that are very similar to those of Charles Ames, and really evolved from even earlier. I think the key to the style and coherence is a kind of structured repetition, which I strongly believe is not actually learned from data in the kind of conventional data-driven machine learning paradigm. Here's a quick example, although we heard one earlier. So basically these, binary forms, clear repetition is, it's stuff that we've all heard before. So in 67 years of AI used to produce music, and we've seen repeated rhythmic patterns as the basis for pop song forms going on for 40 years. That's kind of how I see what's happening. A lot of what's happening today. And I think we have yet to see really compelling new musical languages emerge from computers, nor is there really much effort in this direction. Maybe one exception is that many composers do use computers for radical explorations, but they're not generally using kind of the modern data-driven AI because that would tend to rely on existing forms and existing data, and it just doesn't seem to be the way to get to kind of new interesting directions. So that's my introduction.
Thank you so much. So that actually kind of leads to a question that I've been asking myself. I mentioned I'm a computer scientist. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a computer science conference. It was an AI conference, and there was a panel on, I think, use of AI, creativity in AI, something like that. And a panelist was asked, what kind of work do we need in AI to help make AI more creative? And somebody said, well, here's what you need. You need a quantitative measure, objective quantitative measure of how good a piece of art or music is. And then you can use all of the recordings, all of the art ever collected, and then you can run it through this machine learning model that will maximize that goodness. It'll find the song or piece of art that is maximally good. Now, I don't know what creativity is. That's sort of where maybe I'm going with this question, but I don't think that's it. And so I guess the question maybe is, to what extent is AI capable of being creative on its own? And are we seeing that at all? And maybe I'll throw this to you first, Maya, if you wouldn't mind. You sort of talked about that spectrum of fully autonomous versus fully human use of AI.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. It's really important foundational questions, and Roger was already, I think, touching on some of that in his introductory presentation. Okay, so creativity is often defined as novelty and value. That's super vague, of course. There have been ample attempts to come up with formulas that try to capture what creativity is. I don't know if any of them have been really profoundly satisfying. I think AI, the truth is that what's sort of buried inside of this question is our relationship with the whole notion of something other than humans being creative. Humans are very attached to the idea that we are the only genuinely intelligent and genuinely creative thing in this universe. And regardless of what examples we have to the contrary in the animal world, in the AI world, we sort of just kind of keep redefining the concepts until we are once again the sole owners of creativity and intelligence. I think a lot of what we're seeing out in the world right now are systems that are not even attempting to be creative. But there was, for example, a system called IMS, which was in music, and this is a couple of decades ago, that created a new classical style. that was sort of approved by human musicians as an interesting new classical style. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, at least in some sense, this is definitely possible, but very little effort is going in this direction right now because most effort is going into sort of commercially viable, highly scalable, monetizable systems.
Thank you. And Joanna, you sort of you talked about the monoculture a little bit and the maybe possible effects of lack of creativity or creativity that's based only on outputs of AI. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think if you ask somebody who researches creativity, like a psychologist, they would probably tell you that, and I might be completely wrong here, but that creativity quantitatively is measured by two things. One is the novelty of the product and also the amount of something. So actually having a lot of something. If you're trying to measure like the creativity of a person, you want to look at how many ideas that they have as well. I love this idea about having a quantitative measure of creativity because I feel like, oh, that would solve all of our problems. But that's what creativity is to me. And if you break it down to those two things, actually AI is quite creative, right? But I think we all kind of know that there's also this element that goes beyond novelty and the amount of something produced that makes something truly creative, such that there is that human elemental experience that we all have when something is truly creative. Like, we're all nodding our heads to the music that Caleb put on, but like we immediately knew probably that it was composed by a computer. And it sounded kind of cheesy, right? But like a really good piece of art, like, you wouldn't have that same experience. So that's the part that I don't think that colleague or that whoever it was, the academic, maybe was thinking about when he gave that answer.
Shannon, I really enjoyed listening to your performance last night. To what extent would you say that the AI is adding creativity in your work? What percentage of it is you and what percentage of it is the machine?
Well, my history with music and technology has been nearly two decades at this point, so AI is a newcomer in my world. And right now, so I would actually like to base this more on just technology in general, and then I'll get to the AI part. But for me, growing up, studying the classics, and learning the form and the music theory and all this stuff is a good foundation for what I write, of course. But honestly, I'm more inspired oftentimes by me working with, my multi-effects units and creating sounds and soundscapes and looping, and all that has, helped me write immensely. And just being very, and I have full control over the sounds and the parameters of everything, and nothing's completely out of the ordinary. But when it is, sometimes when magic happens that you didn't expect, or effects pedals to respond in certain ways that I didn't expect, that's oftentimes, that makes it on the record, But then it's just an idea, it's not a complete concept by any means. Then I had to spend a lot of time, that magic that was made in like half a second, I had to spend a lot of time actually figuring out how to compose with that in mind. It's giving me the ideas. So there's a lot of, going back and forth kind of work. Right now, I do not use AI as a major proponent of, my composition skills at the moment. I use it more, I would say, I think one of the best words of advice for creating art I've received was from my, basic drawing teacher at school, who said we were all, at our, we're supposed to draw something, and we all, just had our blank sheets of paper for a pretty long period of time. And he's like, you guys are all intimidated by that blank page. He's like, go outside, take that page, and stomp all over it, rub mud on it, do whatever, bring it back in, then do your masterpiece. And I think with AI at this moment for compositional elements, it's like, oh, that's kind of an interesting idea. Even if it's a bad idea, it still gave me something to ponder. It's like, okay, throw that out. So it's still a very creative process in that way, but there's still a lot of human work at that point. The way I use AI mostly right now is honestly as a tool, within mixing and mastering and stuff like that. Compositionally speaking, I'm still in the very early stages of that, but I have big dreams for doing more collaboration in that way. But.
That's great, thank you. So Caleb, in the generative AI world, I think, at least to me as a computer scientist, it's unclear to me what extent these models are actually, creating new kinds of, say, images, or to what extent they're just sort of copying and pasting different combinations of things they've seen in their massive amounts of training data. I also sometimes wonder, though, like how much of the things that I think are me being creative are just me copying and pasting things from my very, more experience living in the world. I don't know what you think about these generative AI kind of systems, and have you seen sort of hints of creativity in what they can do?
That's a good question. I do think that there is, I do think there's a fair amount of scraping from what already exists, and you can detect that. So that's one answer. And so in terms of could they be creative, I think they can be. There are definitely surprises that do happen. I think, even with human creativity, a lot of times as an instructor, I will tell students to think about some of the influences that they might have, artistic influences, and imagine what like a love child would be. Like what would be the connection, like a merging of those stylistic influences. And AI can do that quite well, and a lot of times that does lead to something that was difficult to imagine beforehand. But if you take these disparate kind of like languages, visual languages, you can put them together, and it does produce something that's different. I don't know if it's exactly new. I feel like my gut reaction is no. Like it's not particularly like creative and new. I think it's still, but I think it will be and can be. So I think it's mostly just where things are at this point that my reaction is that way. I think one of the things, this isn't exactly related to what you said, but one of the things that using these models makes me think of is just that because the results are so ubiquitous, we see them, they see them everywhere, and you can make a bazillion in a minute. I think for people who are working in the creative sphere and working to some extent with generative AI tools, it makes us much more aware of, and maybe like savor more the aspects of the creative practice that are not part of that are not just the image result, not just the product. It's the experience of making, and then it's also dimensions of artwork that are outside of the realm of AI. So at least in my case, the physical material dimensions, and that there's a lot of meaning in material and in performance and in live. These are some of these. It will get there. The robots are coming. It will end up in a lot of these spaces. But for the moment, as creators, a lot of times we are drawn to these places that are a little bit more noisy, a little bit less harmonious. And going back to the problem of what these systems do is that they have an aesthetic system built into them, so that they homogenize by default. And sometimes that can be very satisfying, but it's also superficial satisfying. So for those of us who've kind of been looking at things or looking at images or making music or doing something for a very long time, you begin to have your threshold changes, and you reach this kind of like plateau of interest, and you need something a little bit weirder, a little bit stranger, a little bit more problematic, and I think this is the kind of thing where it's still in our domain.
That's great. And Roger, sort of to follow up on what you were talking about, in the image world, in the computer vision world, the generative AI kinds of techniques, they're purely data-driven almost. And that might be because we've never had a very good visual language or grammar to describe what a photo is, whereas in music, there are these languages and some kind of grammars of some sort to describe them. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit more about sort of the tension between the data-driven sorts of techniques and the more symbolic techniques, and do you think that the AI systems could invent new meaningful music languages that we would enjoy?
Yeah, that's something that I spend a lot of time working on and trying to answer for myself. And my impression is that these data-driven AI for music, either because music has a stronger sort of formal structure, or it's more hierarchical, or there's something about, and maybe it's just the scarcity of data for music, but there's something that seems to prevent large language models and other, data-driven approaches from really abstracting out of music data, what's buried deep down inside. And it may also just be related to the dimensionality, at 44,000 samples per second, a minute of music is a lot bigger than one image. And so I think there's just kind of a big data problem there. But one other thing, if I could just kind of go back to the previous question real briefly, especially listening to Shannon and Caleb's discussion of their practice, it seems to me that in a lot of cases, AI systems are not really providing answers and solutions, but more for artists, for practicing artists, they're more providing questions and problems. And the real creativity comes from, recognizing interesting questions and finding a path to deal with it, to create something really new.
So going back to the comment about the dimensionality, do you think there's a fundamental limit there? Like this is just something that you need a human to do and an AI wouldn't be able to? Or is it just a matter of waiting for a few years when the processing power has grown by another couple orders of magnitude?
Yeah, I think it's hard. Well, it's really hard to say, but I would not be shocked if in another couple of years, with new techniques and bigger machines, that some of these deeper abstractions, really did emerge. And we've seen, some definitely movement in that direction. So if it keeps going, maybe we'll get there. The other kind of hypothesis I have is that that current systems are very much like the kind of non-sequential, non-logical part of our brain that just and some of these ideas were described clearly, I think, by Jeff Hinton. So I'm borrowing some of his ideas. But if you look outside and you see a tree, you don't think about why is that a tree. You just look at it and instantly it's a tree. And that's a good analogy for neural networks as functions that just take a bunch of pixels in and something comes out. And there's really no sequential logic or reasoning or rules in place. But at the same time, humans make plans and they prove things or they critically consider different alternatives and do kind of symbolic reasoning and search. And it may be that that music has such a formal symbolic nature to it that we need to solve that problem in AI. And I really do think that the current even though people are extremely excited about AI and feeling like it's a big revolution, I feel like this is just step one, because we haven't solved the kind of symbolic reasoning and logic side of learning.
I could just add one thing. You asked the question, like I actually don't really think about AI technologies as a generator of creativity. I just think about it as a generator of efficiency, and maybe that's because I'm an economist. But also hearing too, like listening to Shannon and Caleb, I mean, it sounds like a lot of what they're using AI is actually in terms of efficiency. And when we look at other technological developments throughout time, it's always been an efficiency measure. And so for the music industry, I actually think it's a great thing, even though I provided like a really purist, possibly negative view. It's a really great thing, right? Because we have very, very limited technological tools to help make music production more efficient. And in economics, we call this the cost disease problem. Basically, things get more and more expensive, but we're not able to increase production. So you can't play a Beethoven symphony any faster than it takes, right? But like, this is one tool that finally the music industry and the cultural and creative industries can use in order to try to enhance efficiency. And ultimately, again, like speaking as an economist, it's pretty good for the market when you see those types of things happen.
That's great.
Agreed.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's
So I just want to ask one more sort of lightning round question, and then I think we'll turn it over to questions from the audience, if that's okay. So for those who are online, you probably can't see, we have here in person in Bloomington probably 80 or 100 folks in the audience, and sort of profiling based on age. I think there's quite a few undergrads and grad students who are just starting their careers. There's faculty and performers and artists and practitioners who are sort of mid-career. We have at least 2 or 3 deans in the audience, and then people online as well. I'm wondering, for all of us, as we're trying to understand this new world of AI, what advice would you give us? What should we be doing to prepare for this? And maybe I won't call on people, I'll just let you volunteer since this is a harder question.
Can you rephrase that just a little bit?
Sure. What advice would you give to those in the room? And you can choose either to give to all of us at all the different levels that we're at in different career stages, or you can focus on 1 or 2.
I guess I'll go first real quick, but I guess I would harken back to kind of what I said in the earlier presentation was, whether or not, if you're fearful of it, then definitely get involved with the conversation. If you're all about it, get involved and hear other people's fears about the situation. The more we speak about it and just, don't lose ourselves in it, I feel like. But see if it's actually improving your life, if it's improving what you're doing creatively, if it's helping you in your career, amazing, that's awesome. Does it feel authentic to you? Awesome. If it doesn't, and it feels like an entirely different thing, and you are kind of losing yourself in it, maybe take a step back, But I would just advise, whether you use it or not, get involved with the conversation, because the people who are developing a lot of these things, they're not artists, as far as I'm aware. And I just want, I hope that people will get into a conversation more with these developers, and that we don't have, or we address questions. Artists are in the room addressing questions, like you heard, about what's a quantitatively good, because I do remember, I think I heard, I don't know, Alan Watts was asked one time. It was a project where they were trying to, scientists were like, well, if we could start kind of biologically evolving or generating like the perfect humans, like what would that be? And I think it freaked Alan Watts out a little bit. He's like, please have some diversity, please have some type B people, please have some like ne'er-do-wells, please have type A people, like I have a whole diverse variety, because that's what composes our society. And yeah, I think that's it.
That's great, thank you.
I think one thing is to try to break systems, look for ways to intervene, and that's usually where the art happens, in the slippage.
If I can jump in,
Please.
Yeah, my advice would be whatever you want to be, but dive all the way in. I'm thinking about in the early days of computing, there was, tremendous potential there, and some people, like us, became computer scientists, and some people became artists and found, great ways to use computers. And I think we look around now, and I see most musicians using computers are users, but systems are there for them to use, and by developing their artistry, they're ready for that. And so I think AI has a lot of the same kind of properties that you can become an expert on deep learning, but then you can also be someone who treats that more as a black box or a tool. And you think more about, what are the applications? And so, there's sort of something there for everyone.
Maya, I see you unmuted. Do you have?
Sure, to be honest, the other people on the panel already highlighted all the important stuff, like getting involved and trying the systems for yourself. And that's really the heart of it. But so maybe I'll take this opportunity to tie in sort of the original question that you brought up, because I was listening to my co-panelists, a few other thoughts came in. But essentially, as you experiment with generative AI systems. I think it's really important to try to sort of break out of some of these really typical ways that we think about machines, allow for the possibility that perhaps they're helping you more than save time. One time somebody came up to me and said, can AI ever come up with a lyric as great as Taylor Swift's "My Covert Narcissism Disguised as Altruism"? It's like, oh, that's such a great line, and it is. But our AI system, Lyric Studio, routinely comes up with stuff that, in my opinion, at least, is at least on par with this line. But we are not as geared to see brilliance when AI is veering into new territories. We're more likely to say that it's garbage because it's too different from a typical line of lyrics or a typical melody. And so I think as you go out there and explore these systems and kind of try to see how they can help you, to see how you could perhaps help build better AI, it's really important to have a sort of profound open-mindedness that perhaps there is something genuinely creative in there. There is something genuinely brilliant. Essentially discriminate less against the AI, because I think it's a lot more to offer than we sometimes imagine.
Thank you. You're okay. Okay. So now we can turn to questions from
Great.
the audience.
Yes. Fantastic conversations. And one thing I just want to quickly ask you about, because we're spending a lot of time in this conversation thinking about our own practices and how it relates to AI and how we sort of extend our practices into AI. Maya's talking about recognizing that AI might be bringing something to us that we don't necessarily recognize. And I think that this is a phenomenon that's happened. If you think of TikTok as an example, TikTok was developed as a social media platform for people to have fun with. Nobody had the idea, nobody could imagine that TikTok would literally change the music industry in terms of how it thinks about co-creative work and everything else associated with it. It became this massive creative zone for artists who have now become household names, who use TikTok as a vehicle to get there. Likewise, I'm just thinking of the way that we use networks in first world countries versus networks in third world countries. In third world countries, the iPhone is the primary vehicle for communications and networking, whereas for us, there's a whole variety of things that we use. And so there are a bunch of different practices that people use in third world countries that we don't use here. And it seems to me that with AI and the proliferation of AI and the democratization, we were talking earlier on about the billions of people who now have access to this technology, it's quite possible that the new practices are practices that we will not, number one, recognize early on, and number two, won't know how to use because we're so embedded in the practices of our day. And so when I think of creativity in AI, I'm wondering whether any of you see signs of new modalities and new ways, new lenses to think about creativity within the world of AI. Just throwing it out there.
Hello. I asked this question in the last session and they kicked me out. So, oh, no, they recommended I ask it here. But I'm a musician and composer, and I've often felt like my job is to add emotional content to the music, and the guitar, I play electric guitar, and that is about as emotional instrument as I've found. But my fear and my question is, will we ever get AI to feel emotion enough that it can generate emotion to move us, or will it always be something that's trying to manipulate us in thinking that it knows what emotion is?
I hope not.
I can, there's actually a pretty big research on emotion in music, and I'm thinking of Patrick Jocelyn and Roberto Bressin are two people that come to mind. And there's some really interesting questions about emotion in music of does music actually create an emotional response, or does music create the understanding of emotion expressed in the music? So in other words, you might, some people love minor music. So minor, in minor mode generally conveys a sense of sadness, but it makes people happy to listen to that music. And so that's, you can sort of have both going on at once. And I don't think any of the machines that put emotion into music are actually experiencing emotion, but definitely there are techniques for imparting this impression of emotion to make music, sad or happy, such that people will listen to it and say, "Oh yeah, that's a sad version. That's a happy version."
Yeah, I just want to. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Maya, do you want to go ahead?
Sorry.
No problem.
Sure. I just wanted to add on to what Roger was saying. Yeah, absolutely. The machines don't have emotion. I think what's really interesting about this question is really how important that is for us humans, that the entities we're dealing with have emotions. And I think that makes a ton of sense, because in our world, if we encounter a being that does not have emotions, if they're the person whose sort of emotional part of the brain is not functioning very well, that can be really dangerous. That's where you kind of get into potentially psychopathic behavior and criminal behavior and really dangerous things. And machines, I mean, AI does not have emotions. That's not how its brain operates. And I think that's where the discomfort comes from. It makes a lot of sense. But that's where I sort of recommend thinking about it as an alien brain. It's not meant to have emotion. It's okay that it doesn't have emotion. It's not here to communicate its feelings with us, but that doesn't mean that it can't be helpful if we're plugging it into a very specific system and kind of use it in a way that it makes sense to use it.
I basically just agree. I just would say that, yeah, I don't think the intent is necessary. I don't know if we even want to think about the idea of aura, but as somebody who's experiencing it from the other end, I have been tricked and I have been moved, so I think it's capable.
I did just want to add as well, because I was very negative in my initial response there. Just selfishly, as a professional musician, I don't want to be put out of work by a very emotive robot. But at the same time, I do see, maybe this is the wrong way to look at it, but I do see AI in general as a ever-growing library of what we humans are training it to do, and then it takes from there. It's going to take it to a whole other level. But at the moment, I mean, we are very involved in the training of it, and I do expect that it will be pretty emotive at some point. But I think we're, as Roger said, I think we're in this phase one. So. Yeah.
So I have a comment, I guess, and a question. I was interested by your sort of what you pondered earlier about, can AI be genuinely creative? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I feel like there's a component of intent and consciousness there, right? Like the AI is just making stuff. It doesn't know what creative is. And so I think the fact that a huge component of creativity and art is the perception, right? It's the beholder. Like I can be moved by something that AI created. The AI has no awareness of that, or it's just not a factor because it's just making stuff. And so I just wonder how any of you think about that component of consciousness in creativity, and then also the reality that for something to be perceived as creative is really what probably is the important thing, not whether there's some way to measure if objectively it's creative, because the only thing that really matters, I would argue, is that someone perceives it as creative and pleasing or not pleasing, as the case may be.
I'll take the reins.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Go for it.
All right. I hate how it's not perfectly in sync. I think there's just so much interesting stuff in this question. I'll briefly comment on a few things. So just like emotion, the idea that consciousness and intent is necessary for genuine creativity naturally comes from the way that humans are creative, and we sort of project our processes onto the machines. And of course, there's no need for consciousness or intent to get creativity, if we're willing to admit that there are definitely some level of creativity happening in Midjourney and ChatGPT and all of these other models. That being said, I actually have a very specific point of view on AI consciousness, especially when it comes to large models. And I think one really cool way of looking at it is that it's a collective consciousness on all the data it was trained on. So in a way, it's a collective consciousness of sort of all of humanity, which of course, all of humanity has consciousness and intent and emotion, and a lot of that sort of emerges out of the AI. So in a way, when you're creating art with generative AI, you are effectively collaborating with the consciousness and unconsciousness, by the way, with all of its biases of all of humanity. And it's a much more kind of embodied, much more human way of looking at it that I believe is actually quite accurate and valuable.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to think about it too is like another version of creativity. And I forget who said it in the audience is, this concept of creative destruction is just that we take things apart and then we put them back together and then we create something new out of all the old pieces. And so that's very much what generative AI is doing for us. And so I don't know whether or not consciousness is even a required element of creativity, to be honest. Again, like thinking about it very practically, creativity is, it's a really kind of ethereal term that we don't have a definition for, but we kind of do in that it's exactly what AI is doing. So I guess like for me, consciousness doesn't even come into the equation when I think of creativity. And so it doesn't even come into the equation when I think of what the potential of Gen AI is in creative product.
Great, we have a question online.
Yes, hello again. I'm not stealing the show again. I'm actually asking for another individual, Thomas Langen. He is asking, there's been a good deal of neurological research that looks at how there's a large difference between how we respond to live music versus recorded music. The release of oxytocin and other neurochemicals, the mirroring of neuroactivity, and other very significant differences. How might this play into what we consider creative?
Yeah, so this is like, that's the lens that I look at a lot of the integration of Gen AI in music. Like, what is the difference between going to a live music concert and listening to something through Spotify, right? And I'm not 100% convinced about the release of certain hormones when you go and see a live music concert. I think a lot of this is still really unclear about what really happens. I went to this great conference called Music in the Brain, I remember, and like we talked about these same types of things, and I don't think we really know. But that being said, I mean, really, to answer the question, I feel like there's really only a question, which is, is there a difference between, the question is your question, like the answer is your question. Is there a difference? I'm not quite sure. Does anybody else think there's a difference?
Yes, I do. I feel like, to wrap up all these, the three questions so far, I was thinking about context, I think, is everything for how people perceive art, music, and that really is the emotive experience. So for me as a performer, I can only put out what I put out, but 50% of what's happening in that room is the response from the audience, at least 50%. So, I'm sure this has happened to so many people here, but it's like I write a song and I share it with a friend, and the friend's like, oh yeah, I can totally hear how the conflict in Israel and Pakistan came through in that song and blah, blah, blah. And they give me a whole spiel. I'm like, I had none of those thoughts, but that's awesome. I don't want to, it's like, that's all about context, and I wasn't thinking about that in any way. But so art does, it feels very different to different people. And so yes, I do believe that AI art can very much so affect folks in these different ways and bring out emotions. But I will say, regarding live music and recorded music, I believe we can probably all agree that there must be a distinct difference in the brain between living in isolation and living within a community. And for me, it's like when you're listening to your record player at home, and you're really listening to your favorite piece, and you are experiencing emotion. You are going through a whole process. But for me to go out and see that live, and to see that magic moment that's not going to happen again, and you're experiencing it with an audience of people who are right there in that moment with you, is not to be replicated. So I am hoping that all these innovations will actually bring us more back to, okay, let's not throw out tradition, with all this, let's merge innovation and tradition. And I think live performance will become that much more powerful, and the community will become that much more powerful again. So
I think just to make this I think to make this panel a little spicy, I'm gonna disagree. And I'm a mom of 3. I have 3 little kids, and personally, I cannot stand going to live music right now. I can't do it. I used to love it. I went all the time, but I love listening to recorded music, and it brings me to a completely different place. It brings me to like a place of zen that I never get. And so I just don't think we can make the sort of the authoritative decision on whether or not there's something better or not about live music versus recorded music, and whether AI has any. I just think it's sort of like when you're in your 40s, you hear a song that you used to listen to in your 20s that made you cry, right? That used to like cry yourself to sleep with, and then it made you really sad and think about all your ex-boyfriends. But now in your 40s, you're like, this doesn't do anything to me. So I really think it's it's a frame of mind, and that everybody has these different experiences, and so we can't make just a blanket we don't know yet.
And I have a suggestion. We could ask ChatGPT to distinguish between those two for you guys. Yeah, okay.
Also, if I could quickly jump in and just, this reminds me very much of basically one chapter is practically a footnote in a former student's PhD thesis. This is Gus Jha, who's a very active machine learning and music researcher still. And he did a study on perception of listening to music that's performed interactively, and music that's performed interactively with humanoids, robots. And it was very startling to me, after working decades on computer accompaniment, to find out that the interaction of accompaniment makes no difference unless there's a humanoid robot involved. And so, this is very consistent with the recorded versus live music, that if humans are interacting, our whole perception of music changes.
I think this is such a great place to emphasize that no matter how amazing AI is, in the end of the day, we're human, and we like connecting with other humans, and we want to feel the emotion that the human is trying to communicate. And while that's not always the case, very often in a live environment, that's so much more powerful. So, while I'm an AI researcher and I run a musical AI startup, I play live instruments from scratch. I often prefer it live. I often prefer the experience of, playing an acoustic piano without any AI involvement. So I think it's important to sort of not get confused that at the end of the day, this is all made by humans for humans, and the AIs really shouldn't be here to take anything away from us.
So I have an observation more than a question, and it actually builds on this several comments that people have made about context. To some degree, we've opened this conversation as though creativity is a property of the thing that's created, that it's endogenous to the output in some sense. And if that were true, then we would also do the other AI thing and sort of look statistically to see what the history of this kind of stuff is and what's the good stuff, and we would extract rules and so on. I think if we did that, we could actually skip that step because we already know the Bach B minor Mass is probably the best piece of all time. But we don't want every piece to sound like the Bach B minor Mass, and Bach was ignored for 100 or so years after his work, and many other things we deem important creative breakthroughs. The Rite of Spring, all the modern art, all these jazz, all these things were often rejected. And so I think it's actually it's a property of the community of people who experience it as much as it is a thing in itself. And we maybe don't even end up knowing about it for a long time afterwards, because it turns out to be different enough it catches on. The math community worries about this a lot too, because AI is getting very smart at solving math problems that are quite hard, and it can solve some quite faster and many that haven't been easily solved before. But no one yet thinks math AI is creating new math. That's happened when mathematicians decided there were problems that math couldn't solve, and they had to create new ways of solving it to get to those things. So infinite sets, category theory, all this sort of stuff has happened not as an extension, but as sort of a leap out of what was there before. And then it turned out later on it was pretty darn useful. So I think this notion of breaking things and having it be also interactive with how it gets used is part of how the creativity comes out. So just thought that it's not really a question, but there's a theme of breaking things and the way they get used that's a little different here.
And while Frank Graves is standing in front of us, let us thank him for the support that he gave. Okay, good. So any comments, or should we go to the final question here? Oh, there's one online. Michael Suttle. Yeah, go Michael.
Okay, thanks, Philin. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
So I introduced myself yesterday, so I won't repeat that, other than I'm a Jacobs graduate in 1975. And this might be a tangential comment, or maybe it's the theme for the next conference. But I haven't heard anything today or ever about, we hear a lot about AI, artificial intelligence. I haven't heard a darn thing about artificial humor. And in my time at Jacobs, by the way, I've been lucky in my life to work with great musicians. Janos Starker was one of them. Bernie Edelstein, Phil Farkas, Charlie Gorham, just to mention a few. I don't know Starker well enough to know if he fits this, but those other people were all the best at what they did, great artists, and incredibly funny. And I'm not hearing anything humorous out of AI. Maybe I'm missing it, but I don't think it exists. That's my challenge for the next thing. And I just thought I'd make that point and maybe ask that question. Am I missing it? Is it somewhere?
Hey, I'm going to ask Caleb to answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the larger models are getting there, but yeah, they don't make me laugh yet.
Great, thanks, Michael. Final question.
Yeah, so I'm a student here at Jacobs, so I'm really interested in education part of music and also arts, visual arts. So I do think that creativity largely came from education. Education is so important to create more creativity and encourage innovations. So I'm wondering, at the age of AI, what are some changes that you think the music education should have in terms of an institution like Jacobs School of Music? What are some advices that you will give to the music schools? For example, maybe adding something like programming trainings, adding aesthetic classes of music or arts, combination of visual arts and music, or removing something, some repetitive training, some tedious theory training. Yeah, so what are your thoughts?
Somewhat leading question, but
So I love that question. One of the other areas I study is I look at the labor market behavior of artists, in particular what higher education does to artists' careers. And I was hoping we would get the question about well, I guess when we did get the question about what's the advice, and the advice I was going to give is, don't reject AI. It's here, it's going to stay. And for our musicians and for artists artists in training, it's there. It's part of your career no matter what. And in terms of what music schools can do, what art schools can do, I mean, I think number one is embrace it. You know, any single student coming out of any music school and any art school right now has to have this as part of their curricular training, as part of their professional development. Otherwise, you know, everyone else around them when they get out into the labor market is going to have it. So, and that also, I think, gets to the larger point, which is I've thought about a lot, is like, you know, I think I presented some of the threats of AI in terms of what it can possibly do to art, but I don't necessarily believe that it's only a threat. Like, that was a really purist view. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do in our institutions, such as our art schools, that can potentially mitigate these threats. And I think one of those is professional development and responsible training for using AI, and things that Copyright Office is doing that, you know, the Copyright Office spoke about yesterday, about, you know, maintaining policies that may, you know, put at the core human authorship. So there are a lot of things our institutions can do, including our art schools, to make sure that AI is actually a device that, you know, is helping our students eventually when they become professional musicians, getting out into the world and building careers. So I would just say embrace it.
Actually, everything she said, I absolutely totally agree with. I think that covers the what academics, you know, should be doing right now. Fully embracing this, I think it's a responsibility, you know, to making sure that you are set and prepared for a career in this modern world. Actually, what I wanted to address was more what you were saying about, you know, you believe that creativity comes from education, and I agree. And at the same time, I would advise that you be cautious of that too, because personally, as an artist, I spent a lot of time alone with my instrument and with all my electronic gadgets, coming up with sounds and breaking rules and not listening to, at that moment, what anybody was telling me to do. You know, my teacher was saying, don't play guitar. I said, playing guitar helps me become a better cellist. It helps me become a better musician, you know, all these different approaches. So I would just urge, you know, that you spend a lot of time alone, and you spend a lot of time with minimal things, just your instrument or just whatever, you know, whatever your instrument is of choice. And then when you do combine it with technology and AI, you're very specific about what you bring in, and then you listen, you know, and see how they interact. But
yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think acknowledging, I mean, I don't know if everybody has to embrace the technology. I think acknowledging it and acknowledging, you know, how one wants to interface with it or doesn't want to, I think that's useful. But certainly there should be paths for people who are interested in understanding the technology to be able to gain that information while they're in school, especially from a broad view. Just how do these models work? What are they doing? And what needs to change about them? And what can we learn from them? Because there are a lot of ideas that we can get from the way these models are structured. And I think that there's a lot of kind of creative potential with this kind of negotiation between our way of thinking and these models' ways of generating.
Any thoughts from folks online?
Well, I have the at least it's my opinion that a lot of musicians could benefit from greater technical literacy, or maybe I should say basic technical literacy. So, you know, I think there are so many technical things happening that are pretty basic, like, you know, what is a sound file and how does digital recording work? You know, not at the level of an electrical engineer, but just in terms of, you know, storage and files and samples, and, like, you know, the difference between different music representations, like you know, symbolic notation versus MIDI versus audio. And you know, I think a lot of people pick this up, but it's kind of surprising how many people do not, or maybe it's just surprising to people like me that, you know, work in this field. It's like day in, day out. You kind of think, how could somebody not know this? But I think there's, you know, room in education for just this basic technology.
And I think that makes us exactly out of time, doesn't it? So
it does. It does.
I want to thank everyone on the panel. This has been a really wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.